How's it going, guys? This is Kyle Brotherson here. This is the Dirt Bike Channel podcast. This is the place where you come to talk about all things off-road dirt bike and to maybe learn some things. Have some entertainment on the road as you go down the road, or wherever you listen to these podcasts. They should be on all major podcast directories. I thank you for coming in. As I record this, it is December 29th. It's Sunday afternoon, just after church. Figured I'd come in here. I did the review on the 2020 Beta 200 RR a few days ago on YouTube. I think it came out yesterday. So I've been working on this for quite a while. And I figured, you know what? I probably should just kind of do the follow-up podcast to it, because I think I did a podcast after 4 hours, my initial thoughts after 4 hours on the bike, but then there was nothing else said on it on the podcast after that. So this is me kind of fulfilling the whole review and giving the entire review for you guys out in podcast land, which I think is super fun. I'm really enjoying doing these podcasts. I don't know how much you guys enjoy listening to them. If you do enjoy them, please rate and review. That helps other people to, find these things, and then just share them with your friends or whatever. If something is interesting, please share them with your friends and colleagues and whoever else. So yeah, let's jump into the full review of this bike. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I purposely, I haven't put all my thoughts down on paper. A lot of times what I'll do with these podcasts is I'll create a big outline here and I'll kind of go off of it. I decided not to create an outline. Basically, what I decided to do was just have a few pictures up in front of me of the bikes in various scenarios to kind of remind me and give me some additional things, and I'm just going to talk front to back, from the bike front to back. But I will start out with the thing that this bike does better than any other bike that I have ever been around. And I want to start this way because I think it's worth mentioning. I didn't even comprehend that a bike might do this or might give me this impression before I started riding this bike and putting significant amounts of time on it. But it does something that no other bike I've tested has ever done, or at least does something better than any other bike that I've ever been around. And that is this. It is a bike that can be ridden by the first-time rider or the seasoned expert. And it's actually really good for both of those different riders. And that's kind of crazy when you think about it. I mean, it's one thing to say, any beginner bike can be ridden by a pro. I get it. I've ridden with Shane Watts when he's riding his Yamaha TTR 230. And he's an amazing rider, and he makes that bike. That's more of a bike that a lot of people would say a beginner bike, but I didn't have fun riding it. So I'm not saying that you can't go fast on all of these different tools and blah, blah, blah. What I am saying, though, is this 2020 Beta 200 RR is an incredible beginner bike if you're a full, like an adult. And it's an incredible bike even for an advanced rider, even far more advanced than me. And those riders can have a ton of fun on it and be just fulfilled and enjoy it for years to come. If you bought a Beta 200 RR as your first bike, you could ride that until, you retired. The bike has more capability than 99% of us will ever have, or that we'll ever be able to fulfill or max out. And that's true of most bikes, right? But here's a bike that is really, really easy to ride from the get-go for a beginning rider, and then it's got enough capability in its frame and its geometry and in the suspension and in the motor that an advanced rider can and will have a ton of fun on this bike. So really, really cool. Something that none of the other bikes out there do as well. I just don't think they do. This bike is better for a beginner because it doesn't have so much power that it's going to get you into trouble. It feels light. It feels nimble. It's going to give you all of the, the major, tick all the major boxes that you want on a beginner bike. It's even a little bit shorter to the ground. And then it will blitz in the desert and do all those things. And yeah, you could revalve the suspension a little bit if you wanted to make it go so it can, maybe go a little bit higher speeds and absorb some of those bumps and things. But that's the same thing you would do with any bike. But this thing is incredible. It can do really technical stuff. It's got enough power to pull you through basically anything. And obviously you're going to learn how to use the clutch a little bit more than if you got like a 300 two-stroke or something, and so it's just like this really, really cool package. And I was kind of blindsided by it. I try to go into these reviews with an open mind. And it's something that I learned years ago on the first beta. I mean, I've learned it time and time again, but The first beta that I did back in 2017, that was one where I really realized you've got to have just more of a blank slate, open mind when you go into these reviews. And I've tried to learn from that. And that's what, this one just boom, it was so good, because I just try to go in with like not expectations too high, not expectations too low, try to find, a middle ground on my expectations and just keep an open mind with things. And yeah, this bike really, really surprised me. So both beginners and experts can use this bike and love this bike. If you are going to put like a second bike, like a buddy bike or a backup bike or whatever, a change of pace bike in your arsenal, don't overlook this one because it's pretty freaking awesome. I've really, really enjoyed riding it. And obviously I want to thank Beta USA for providing this bike to me. I did not buy it. And this is not a paid review. That's not how this works. When I've talked with Tim Pilge in the past, I've said, look, I'm going to say what I want about the bike. Are you okay with it? I'm going to express my real opinions and they get it. They understand that, what? We're not going to pay him. We're not going to try to, skew the review or anything. We're just going to let him talk about it. And it works. So it works out well for everyone. Anyway, so let's start with the bike kind of front to back. So I've given high praise on the bike overall that it can do those things. But not everything about the bike is like incredibly positive. None of the bikes, nothing is perfect on any of the bikes that I'm riding and reviewing. Some of them are better than others, and some have, weaknesses in some places where others have strengths, and, the list goes on. But the first thing I want to talk about is the tires. I don't love the tires that they put on these Beta bikes. They're either coming with like a Michelin Enduro tire or the Metzler like 6 days tires, and I don't like them. That's fine because it's a wear part that you can. So it's not a reason not to buy the bike. I don't like the tires that come on a lot of the bikes, like a Dunlop AT81, just a straight up Dunlop AT81. It's not my favorite tire. It's a pretty good tire for certain things, but it's not my favorite tire. And so I'm not going to beat up Beta or anything. They probably have a really good tire deal with Michelin or Metzler or whatever, and they want to be something different than Dunlop, which comes on a lot of the other bikes. So I'm not going to fault them for that. It's not my favorite tire. And so I've swapped out the tires for different things pretty quickly, right off the bat is how I've kind of been doing it. Then right up there in the middle of your wheel, you're going to have Nissan brakes. So Nissan brakes it's a good brake. It's out there on a lot of bikes out there in the industry. But it isn't my favorite. The Nissan brake works fine, and it worked pretty well on this bike. It worked pretty well on the Beta 390 that I had before it. I didn't love it on Beta in the past of 2017. I felt like that one was grabby, and that is the issue with these brakes. The Nissan brake, I feel like, is just a little bit grabby, where it isn't as progressive as I want the feel to be. And so what happens is I feel like I'm getting good stopping power. Sorry, I'm unzipping my jacket here. A little warm in my basement office right now. I thought it was going to be cold because it's usually cold here in the basement, so I put on a little zip-up hoodie, and now I'm too hot. Anyway, so after a while of you pulling on that front brake, you're trying to get a little bit more, and then all of a sudden there's a tipping point, and then it just grabs, and it's just not quite as progressive as like a Brembo brake or a Magura brake, but it works. And Tim Pilge said, hey, Beta has just stuck with that Nissan brake because it works good, and then they use that same brake on all of their models, and so it makes it kind of simple for them, and yada yada yada. The interesting part to me, though, is it has the Brembo clutch on the other hand. So you've got a Nissan brake and a Brembo clutch. And to me, I would just rather see the Brembo brake and the Brembo clutch. But just something to note there. It is then attached to some Excel rims, at least the one that I tested. I don't want to go too much into that because I might have swapped rims on that. I'm just looking at a picture, and I think these are the rims from the race edition. I think I just swapped the tires from the race edition. So swap the tires and wheels from race edition. So I'm not going to talk about the rims. But it does come with a ZF open cartridge, 48 millimeter front fork. And this thing was good. I didn't have any problems with it. It's valved a little bit softer to do, some of the tighter single track and absorb some of those bumps. It's not like a motocross valving or anything like that. But I thought it was really good. It didn't take me very long to play around with the clickers to find a spot that I thought was pretty predictable to me. And I never once then afterwards felt like the front wheel or the front forks were trying to kill me. And I did a lot of slower stuff and then some higher speed stuff, and the bike just performed really, really well. Moving up to the headlight, it comes with a really good headlight that has a high beam and a low beam, which was very good. Probably the best headlight that I have used on any of the bikes when they were just stock, so that's pretty cool. Did not come with handguards. So you have to put some sort of handguards on there. Some people aren't going to mind that because they'll want to put some full wrap handguards on their bike, and so they don't care that it doesn't come with like any flag style handguards. I've been getting away and really liking the flag style handguards on most of my bikes. I just move my levers in a little bit, and then Teflon tape under the levers, and then I haven't been breaking levers hardly at all. Every once in a while you do, but levers aren't too crazy expensive. So doesn't come with handguards. That's something to note on that. There is a lot of stuff up there on the handlebars because the bike comes wired with a horn, which I don't like. It comes basically pre-wired, I think, for signal lights and yeah. So there's a bunch of stuff on the bars that I don't really love, but it is up there. Just something to note. As we move down from the handlebars down, then we start looking at the map switch. The map switch is kind of right there in front of the front of the fuel tank, and I like the map switch in that location. I didn't do a lot of switching around and playing around with the maps because I loved the initial map. It was very good for me. And I did put it on, the secondary map a time or two, but it wasn't like a big thing. I didn't do a ton of testing with that because I really, really loved the power delivery on the full enduro map. Moving down, radiators. The radiators, this is the only major disappointment for me on the bike. The radiators are mounted high enough up in the frame and forward enough in the frame that it actually limits the mobility of the handlebars, how much the handlebars can turn. As my riding has progressed, I've gotten to the point where I'm doing a lot more balance drills and a lot more full lock turns and things. And it's really helped me in the hard stuff and the nastier stuff. And I've gotten used to, I've been pulling steering stops out of my bikes to to make it so they can turn as far as possible on all the different bikes that I have. And this one doesn't turn nearly as far. You take the steering stops out of it and those, the forks come in contact very quickly with the radiators, and that becomes a problem because it doesn't turn nearly as tight. I did a review. I was noticing on the rides and different things, and we were kind of testing it informally on the trail with other bikes. I've decided not to list any other bike manufacturers when I talk about Beta, because the Beta owners get so pissed off at me when I compare it directly to any other brands. So if you'll notice in my full review, I did not say a single other bike brand in that full review because I'm just talking about the Beta. Now, in order to do a real review, you kind of have to know what these other bikes feel like and what these other bikes have. So just say two different undisclosed brands we tested the turning radius of this bike against. And this bike was by far the worst. It has the largest turning radius of any bike that I have purposefully tested. I know that this bike turns, it's got a bigger turning radius than the 2020 Beta 300RR that I have. So it seems to be unique to this frame, because I think it's got its own, unique frame where this one, the radiators are up high enough and forward enough, if you look at pictures, that handlebars can't turn very far. And so that means it's a little bit tougher to ride this bike in the nasty stuff and the switchbacks because your front wheel is wanting to roll off the cliff instead of turn around and make it on the cliff. A lot of people thought I beat a dead horse on that, but there was nothing else to complain about the bike. Everything else is like minor this, minor that. That was the only one thing that I think is a whiff on this bike, is everything else is like a solid triple or a home run. It's pretty dang cool. So I wish that and some guys are kind of making a workaround for this by basically bending their radiators. They're heating them up and then just kind of bending and putting a divot in there, like a 1/2 inch divot or something, like a half round divot, or, a rounded divot in the radiators, like a dimple or something. And if I was going to keep this bike long term, I would definitely be looking to do something like that in order to get a little bit more travel on my handlebars. I also noticed that this bike is a little bit more susceptible to bending the radiators than some of the other bikes out there, at least the bikes that I've been testing it against. Because I slam bikes down, and this bike, I bent the radiators pretty badly. On a lot of the other bikes, in recent years, I haven't felt like I needed radiator braces. Like Bulletproof Designs make a really good guard. Flow Motorsports does a really good guard. There's a few out there that make a really good radiator brace, and that might be something you'd want to do if this was your bike. Sorry, I got to get a drink here. I've been kind of trying to get over some flu-like symptoms over the holidays here. Had a ton of people in town, and I just, on Christmas night, I just kind of started to be under the weather, and I've been trying to fight it and sleep it off the last few days. So apologize for my voice and having to break a few times to take a drink. But the radiators on these are a little bit more susceptible to, bending and getting damaged. So you might want to look at radiator braces if you're going to have this as your primary bike. So yeah, moving down then, the pipe. I really like how they've tucked the pipe up. A lot of these smaller bore two-strokes, because this is a 200cc two-stroke, if we didn't mention that from the beginning, the pipe is tucked up pretty good, and so it makes it so you don't hit the pipe as much. It's tucked up high and it's rolled back, which is pretty cool. I still have dented it on, a few different places, but not any major super bad dents. It isn't like the older, 300s of the past or something where they'd hang down and like really in the way. So that's pretty cool. While we're on the topic of the motor, because we're basically moving right into that, it's 200cc two-stroke. It is not counterbalanced, but it didn't bother me. The vibration on the bike you really only notice when you get out on like a transition road. When you're on single track, the bike is it's gelling underneath you so much that the only thing, like the vibration just lets you know that it's alive, and you're not thinking about the vibration. It's not numbing your hands. It's not numbing your feet on the pegs. It just feels really good. They also have this one in an oil injected. It's oil injected. And so you don't mix gas. You're just putting straight pump gas in the fuel tank, and then you've got an oil reservoir under the seat, which does the mixing for you, the oil injection down into the motor, and that works good. I mean, but here's the one thing: everyone is freaking out on this other brand that shall remain nameless that starts with a K, and the bikes are like orange. There's a ton of people that are so worried about those bikes just blowing up, and the reason why they're worried about the bikes blowing up is because they're oil injected. You notice how I just let that pause? I don't hear people complaining about that much on the betas. And I wouldn't say it's the exact same technology, because that other one is an EFI bike. It's a fuel injected and an oil injected bike. This is a carbureted bike, but it's oil injected. And so if that oil pump fails, then this bike is going to fail. But people they don't talk about that a lot. They're not complaining about that, like they are with that other orange brand. But that is the susceptibility this bike has. It didn't fail on me, and I'm not too worried about it, but it is a failure point on the bike that you should be aware of. Okay. So, oil injected bike, 200cc. It's a 6-speed bike, 6-speed transmission. It's kind of a wide ratio transmission where first gear is pretty low, second gear is also low, and then it kind of, it catches up to the other gears. Third gear is a little bit bigger gap between second and third gear, but it isn't super terrible. The thing that I would mention though about the shifter is that the shifter is kind of close to the foot peg for me. And this happens to me on the betas. I feel like it's just a little bit close to the foot pegs, which means if you got a bigger foot, it's harder to get your foot underneath there to do the upshifts. I wish that the shifter on that left foot was a little bit further forward, maybe like a 1/2 inch further forward. That's just for me. Maybe, and I'm a size 10.5 shoe, but by the time you get the big riding boots on there and everything, I feel like it's sometimes kind of hard to get your foot under there. The other thing I would say is the transmission, and I didn't mention this on the YouTube podcast because it's so hard. I mean, I've already talked now longer than the YouTube podcast is, and I haven't even, we're not even, I don't know how far we are, but say the podcasts are a little bit longer, and so sometimes it's easier for me to include some additional things. The transmission is a little bit notchy, so it's hard to shift sometimes. I've noticed that it will be harder for me to shift up, and sometimes it's harder for me to shift down. And when I'm going from second gear to first gear, I end up hitting neutral quite a bit. You really have to stomp down on this thing. There's another blue bike out there that I reviewed a little while ago, and I had kind of that same problem on it. In fact, 2 different blue bikes, I had a problem on that. I understand every once in a while you're going to hit neutral, it happens on every bike, but this one, it just seems like it happened a little bit more. The transmission is kind of like sticky, notchy, and I don't know exactly why. Sometimes they get a little bit better after you ride them for 5 or so hours. They're notchy in the first hour or 2. This one never really got any better. It was just kind of notchy the entire time. So not a deal breaker. It wasn't even enough that I wanted to mention it on the YouTube version of the review, but it is something to note here. Over on the other side, on the right brake, I wish that the brake pedal came out just a little bit further. So they're trying to kind of like cut a balance. If it sticks out too far, then it's easy to bend and it's easy to, get torn off and all this stuff. So I know they're trying to keep it tight and tucked into the bike and everything, but I just think it's a little small. For my liking, it's a little bit small. I wish it was a little bit bigger pedal so that it was easier to get with your toe. They do not come with kickstarts. I freaking hate that. Talked about it with Tim Pilge when I had him on the podcast. In fact, I pushed him super hard on it in email. I pushed him really hard on it in email in advance of our podcast, and then I just kind of like backed off of it, because he was saying that, yeah, we took them off our bikes, and we figured if everyone wanted them, then they would all be buying them, and we know that they don't want them because they're not buying them. And I said, Tim, in the email, I'm like, just because your customers, just because only like 20% of your, or like 15% of your customers buy a $300 part, or I can't remember. It might even be $400 part. It could have even been $5. It's somewhere between $300 and $500. I'm like, just because a small percentage of those customers buy the it's not aftermarket, but buy the additional part, doesn't mean that they don't want it. It just means that these freaking bikes are expensive and that part is expensive. I think that the majority of the riders out there, at least the ones that are riding the type of stuff that I'm riding, want a freaking kickstart on the bike. They don't care that it's 2 extra pounds heavier. This bike already is heavier than the other bikes that are really, really similar to it that you would compare it directly to. And so, I just want the bike to have a backup kickstarter. I'm trying to pull up my website so I can remember exactly what the weight is on the bike. If you want to see what bike weights are, you can just go to dirtbikechannel.com like I'm doing right now, and then one of the menus up all on the top is bike info, and then you can go down to dirt bike weights. The 2020 Beta 200RR was 241 pounds. That's full of oil and that's full of fuel. People want to fight me on that. I should weigh them dry, all this other stuff. I can't get all the fluids out. People are like, even if people wanted me to weigh them with no fuel in the tank, that would mean I'd have to take the tank off of every bike and dump it out before I put them on the scale. I'm not doing that. I just weigh them exactly how they are when I go to ride them, which I always have my bike topped off with fuel on the rides because we're doing like 40 to 70 mile loops. So I always put, the bike full. So it's 241 pounds, which is heavier than a lot of the other bikes out there in kind of its class. It's not the heaviest bike that I've done, but it's also not the lightest bike. And so let's keep the 2 pounds or 3 pounds and just, give us a kickstart. I digress. The skid plate. So it does come with a skid plate, which I think is pretty cool. I like the fact that they give us a skid plate because we're paying a lot for these bikes. So yeah, thanks for giving us a skid plate. The only issue is that the skid plate does not cover the linkage. So that's a little bit of a whiff. If we're going to have linkage, I think our skid plate needs to cover that linkage, and this one does not. The bright side of that, though, is that the Beta linkage doesn't hang down as much as like a Japanese bike, or heaven forbid I should mention, one of those Austrian bikes. So that's a good thing. This Italian Princess, the linkage doesn't drop down quite as much, but it still is there and you still can hit it. So I think that the skid plate should cover that. But although the skid plate does mount with bolts, they have a bolt on the back of, the skid plate that goes up through into the frame. Awesome. Thank you for doing that. And then it bolts up into the frame on the front. And I might be confusing it with the 300 because I think the 300 version bolts a little bit differently, but they have. I'm pretty sure that this one does bolt into the frame. I was just installing the skid plate on the 2020 300 version, the race edition, the other day, and so I've got that in my head, and hopefully I'm not confusing it with that. So yeah, and then if we move, the foot pegs are totally fine. It's a cast foot peg, and I don't have any problem with the pegs. I'm not a huge aftermarket peg guy. It's got a ZF rear shock. It's really good. Cool thing about the shock adjustment on the back is they've got a dial, and on your high speed, like we always have clickers, right? You can do the clicker with the screwdriver on your low speed compression on the shock, but they have a dial on the high speed, which is pretty stinking cool because that means you can just click it. It's clicker dials on the high speed. I wish the other manufacturers, WP and Showa and Kayaba and you name it, insert name, insert suspension manufacturer here, instead of putting like a 17 millimeter socket there, which is another thing you have to carry around in your pack or whatever, or keep it around if you're going to go to the track or trail or wherever you're going to test. These guys gave you a clicker. It also has clickers on the front fork, which is awesome because you don't need a freaking screwdriver or a right angle screwdriver or this, or that, or the other, or an extra tool. These clickers are something that you're supposed to be able to, click around a little bit and find your happy spots. That's the reason we have clickers, is so that you can make changes. And so ZF and Beta has got this, so you have a clicker on the high-speed compression there. You're still going to have a screwdriver for your low-speed compression, and you're going to have a screwdriver down on the bottom or a coin down on the bottom to do your rebound, but it's cool, and it is there, and it does work. The silencer / it's not a spark. I don't think it's spark arrested, but it is a big old, silencer. It looks pretty big and not my favorite looking silencer, but whatever. It does have a push button seat where you can take the seat off with just a push button, and obviously down under there, that's where your battery is, and that's where your oil reservoir is. Not a ton of other stuff to talk about under there, but I do kind of like being able to take the seat off with no tools. Every once in a while, it's a little bit grabby for me. So sometimes I do have to wiggle it with two hands, but at least I'm not using tools to get in there. So that's a positive. Another thing we didn't cover on the motor is that you do have a power valve adjustment. It works with an Allen key in there. So, and it does actually change, that's you determining how high of an RPM it is before the power valve comes completely open. And Beta does encourage you to adjust that. And it makes a big difference on the bike. When it first came to me, the power was a little bit more muted, and I took an Allen key and screwed that thing out a little bit to relieve, take some of the pressure off of that spring, and it woke the bike up. The bike it's got a lot of power. This thing is a pretty cool package because it's got a lot of, it sings up on the top end, got a lot of top end, and then quite a bit of low end. This bike actually will gut it out over things that it just didn't seem like it was going to, because you feel you're like, oh, I'm on a smaller bore bike. If you've ridden like a 150 or something, or even other 200s, they're just a little bit, they don't have quite as much low end grunt, but this one has a lot of low end grunt. I really enjoyed it, and then it sings up on top. If I was going to, if you gave me the option of that orange bike that's a 150 or this Beta 200, I take this Beta every day. I like it that much better. I like it so much better than the 150 that I would totally rather have this bike than that orange 150. So moving back, the swing arm, it's got a really cool looking swing arm. You've got, it's black, and then it's got the brushed aluminum, on kind of a stripe coming down it. Looks really, really good. I like what they've done with their swing arms. In fact, the whole bike to me is just a good looking bike. I think I like the 300 race edition better as far as looks overall than this one, because I'm not a huge fan of the white. This has got a lot of white on it, and the white and red and black kind of looks good. Yeah, I like the way this bike looks, but I think I like the 300 race edition look better, if I'm dead honest. But I love how they have the red frames and everything. So this bike, cool looking red frame, with some different black pieces to kind of set it off, and it's a good looking bike. On the back, though, it's got the Nissan rear brake. I'm not going to bash on the Nissan rear brake at all. I don't have enough feel in my foot to be able to say whether or not this is, better or worse than any of the other braking components out there. I've got enough feel in my hand that I feel like I don't like it as much, but on the foot, it's totally works. Taking another drink there. Man, that water is good. So good. We talked about the tires on the rear. I don't love the tires that they give you, but I won't beat that again. So what are some of the other things on the bike to note? I didn't put a radiator fan on the bike, and there were a couple times that I needed to kind of stop because we rode it in some snowy conditions. We rode it in some muddy conditions where I needed to, kind of just let the bike cool a little bit. It's got a decent size tank that has a reserve petcock for you so that you can, know that you're about to run out of gas, I guess I should say. The plastic on the rear. So here's something. The very first time I looped the bike out, it's got like a license plate holder that comes down. And so it's got this big, it's got a tail light in there and a license plate holder, and it's kind of all integrated. Some of the other bike manufacturers do this too. And I don't love all that plastic there. All that brittle, hard plastic there means the first time that you loop the bike over, it snaps things, it breaks things. And so I broke the rear fender right away within one of the first couple of rides because I looped the bike over and it just, breaks all the plastic and broke the taillight assembly and everything. It's pretty rigid plastic back there. It's not, I think it needs to be a little bit, floppier. There's a fine line with that, I'm sure, but I think it needs to be just a little bit floppier so that it doesn't break quite as easily. Something else that happened on this beta and the last beta that I had, the 300, is the plastic is sharper. Just the edges on plastic on these betas, it's got kind of a sharp edge to it. Some of the other manufacturers, I think they're kind of like molding them a little bit differently, or they're just kind of, sanding them down just a little bit, because on this one, I'll get cut on it. Like if I reach down, when I pick up a bike and put it on a stand, a lot of times I'm on the rear of the bike and I'll grab the rear tire on the rim. And so your hand is down there, which means the fender is kind of up in your shoulder area. And as I lift it up and I just then move it over onto a stand, I'm acting this out for you here in my office. I'm looking like a monkey, trying to like show you what I'm doing with grabbing it, looking like an ape, with my hand down there, which means then my arm, my upper arm and my bicep and everything is kind of right there on the rear fender, and it like will cut me. And so did the Beta 390 RR. I don't know if I ended up talking about that on the review, but the plastic on these things and the 300 race edition that I have sitting out there in my shop, it's the same way. Whoever is making the plastics for Beta, they're sharp. They have sharp edges to them, and it's kind of annoying. So you might want to get like a little sanding block or something. You wouldn't have to sand a lot. I'm not saying you have to sand a ton. I'm just saying there's some sharp edges on the stuff that you might want to just, buff off or sand off if you're going to keep the bike, very long. Something to note there. I'm trying to think about any of the other things on the bike. Oh, let's talk about a little bit about the carburetor. So it's a Key-in carburetor, and it's a good carburetor. I didn't have any problems with it. I ended up, jetting it. I tried 3 different versions and tinkered with it 3 different times. One thing I will say is there's not quite enough room in there with the way that the frame is and the way that they have, the phantom kickstart area that doesn't exist. When you go to turn the carburetor over, it's easy to, it's not a problem to get your main jet out and your idle jet out of the bottom, because you can kind of turn it enough that way to get that stuff out. It's tight, but you can do it. But then to get the needle out, they've got like a coil up there that's kind of bolted up in the frame above the carburetor. And then with the way that everything is aligned in there, I could never really turn it enough so that I could get my needle jet out without taking the tank off. A lot of the other bikes out there, and it looks like you have plenty of room if you're just looking at it from a distance, but then you get in there and you start turning things around, and I could never get that thing to come off. I could never get my needle out without taking the tank off. So that was just a little bit extra time, but that's not the carburetor. That's just kind of how the bike is and how that works. But I ended up getting the carburetor jetted really nice where it worked really well. We took the bike, up in the mountains at 9,000 feet. And then we also took it down to 5 miles of hell and rode around there. And the bike ran really, really good everywhere that we went after, I started doing that. As far as premix, I'm just running the Motul stuff in the bike. There's no reason to run anything else because it's easy. You just dump it in the reservoir and it premixes it for you. So why change it, Yeah, pretty stinking good bike. I really really enjoyed riding it. Oh, trip computer. I do like the trip computer on this bike because it has something that some of the other trip computers don't have. So you've got trip 1, trip 2, and then you have timer for trip 1 and timer for trip 2, which records your engine hours, like how long, the trip was in engine hours, which is pretty cool. Some of the other manufacturers out there don't really do that. So I enjoyed that because I'm kind of a numbers geek. You've got your own little beta injection molded handle grips, which look kind of cool. You're going to wear those out though fairly quickly, and then you're going to have to swap for something else. There's not as much ground clearance on these betas, so because they have a little bit lower seat height, which I don't know, maybe we should have led with that. They have a little bit lower seat height, right around 1 inch to 1.25 inches on the lower seat height immediately right off the gate on most of the betas. And then obviously if you do the BYOB program, build your own beta, you can custom order a ton of things. You can order a lot of different things, but you can also get like the low boy kit that they have. The low boy kit drops it down another 2 inches. So if you got that, then the bike would be almost 3 inches lower, or maybe it would be 3 inches lower than some of these other bikes out there. So if you're a shorter rider, let's say you're, 5'6", this is going to be a really good option for you. Super good option. Even if you're 5'10" or 5'9", it's going to be a really good option for you because it's lower to the ground. And sometimes being lower to the ground is going to be a really good thing. Maybe you're a woman who has a little bit shorter legs. Kelly McCahey. Kelly, if you're listening to this, yes, I'm talking about you. Kelly rides this bike, and she loves it. We did a podcast with Kelly McCahey. She does the over and out dirt bike events for women back in New Jersey area on the East Coast. If you haven't listened to that podcast episode, you should go back and listen to it. She rides one of these things, and she loves it, and I love it too. I can't figure out why you wouldn't want to buy one of these bikes. And the only problem I have with it is that turning radius. And if I could fix the turning radius on this bike, I give the thing 5 stars. At this point, I give it, 4 stars. 4.5 stars, I guess. I don't know. I didn't even think about that. I just threw that out right now. But I really, really enjoyed the bike. Had a lot of fun. Had a lot of fun riding. I think they've got it geared appropriately. They did just a ton of things right. There's just a couple of those little things, the nitpicky things. I wish it had injection molded graphics because I feel like the graphics come off a little bit easier and on the decals than some of the bikes. I'm not going to bash it too hard because decals come off. Nissan front brakes, it's a feel thing for me. I don't love it as much as some of the others, but hey, nothing like too crazy there. The plastic is a little bit brittle. She doesn't turn quite as tight as I'd like her to, but hey, the bike actually feels pretty darn narrow and pretty darn good. And aside from the fact that it does weigh 241 pounds, it doesn't feel like that. This bike feels light and agile and nimble when you're on it. In fact, of all the bikes that I took it around with and swapped over, it felt the lightest of any of them. And that's probably because it's the 200 and it has, not quite as much gyroscopic force on the thing, and it's got a really cool, geometry on the front end of the bike, which just makes it playful and agile and nimble. It was just good. And the thing, when I'd be riding the bike, this is something, when I get into the zone, one of the things I'm looking for on a bike is after I ride it for an hour, am I thinking about the bike anymore? The goal is to not be thinking about it. The goal is to have the bike work, I don't want to use the term perfect, but work well enough underneath you that then it just becomes an extension of your body. And you're not worried about what the front tire is going to do. You're not worried about what the fork is going to do. You're not worried about what the back end is doing. You're just seeing the trail and seeing the obstacles in front of you and just envisioning yourself getting through them and creating lines in your mind and just going. And I have that feeling on this bike. I just go. I'm not thinking about the clutch. I'm not thinking about the motor. I'm not thinking about my taxes. I'm not thinking about my mortgage payment. I'm just thinking about what's in front of me and how awesome it's going to be to cross that and to get through that. This bike does that for me. And I think it would do it for you too. If you're a first-time rider, this is going to be awesome for you. If you are a experienced rider and you want to try something different, you want to have a change of pace. You're tired of the 450 or you've got a 300 and you want to try something new. Or you have a 254 stroke and you want to try something new. This bike is that. It's a change of pace bike. It's awesome. I loved riding it. So I think you might too. That is my full review of this bike. It was a freaking awesome bike. And again, I want to thank Beta USA for getting that bike to me. I need to get it back to them. And I had a ton of people saying like, oh, give us this bike. And I can't give it to you because it's not my bike. But it's good enough and everything. And the other Beta that I had, the 390 that I had before this, was my favorite four-stroke of all time. So I decided to go out there and buy my first Beta. So I bought the Beta 300 RR Race Edition, sitting out in my shop. I've been slowly setting it up. I'll start riding it in mid-January and putting some time on that bike, and it will be one of my next sweepstakes bikes. So in March, April, May timeframe or whatever, whenever I get everything lined up, that bike is going to be up for grabs. For you guys. So you guys will be able, I'm going to give a Beta away. Most likely, I'll also be giving away reviewing and giving away a Yamaha 2020 Yamaha YZ250FX. Was going to do the 450 version of it, but the 250 version beat it out on the Facebook group. So I did a poll and a lot of different bikes. I had Honda's in there, KTM's in there, Yamaha's in there. Of course, I didn't say Beta because I already decided I was going to do a Beta for the giveaway, but the Yamaha YZ250FX clean house on all the other bikes, and so that's what you guys want to see me ride, review, and give away next. So got a Beta coming up and a Yamaha coming up. So that's what's on the docket. This will probably be the last time that you hear from me on Podcast Land in 2019. I only started this podcast less than 90 days ago. I want to thank you guys for all of your support on this. I think I should have started the podcast about 2 years ago, but I didn't. But there's no time like the present, right? So I hope you guys had an amazing 2019. It was a really exhausting and amazing and rewarding and fulfilling 2019 for me. Looking forward to even having bigger and better in 2020. That's what I'm going to be trying to do, trying to optimize some things, trying to work super hard. I've been working my guts out. The last 3 months, man, I've worked more than I've ever worked in my whole life. So I got to figure out some optimization things that I can do for this to make it work better. And that's what I'm going to try to do in 2020. Okay, guys, Happy New Year, and I will see you again here in Podcast Land on the other side. Thanks, guys. Let's leave a single track.